Morning, my name's Simon. Welcome to Bennett's Bike Social. Welcome to sunny Tuscany and welcome to the launch of Ducati's 2022 Multistrada V2 S.
So here we are on day 2, the launch of Ducati's 2022 Multistrada V2 S, in this case travel. And the reason I say it's day 2 is because yesterday, the first day, was a complete washout. It rained and it rained, it was torrential, which is good. You learn quite a lot about the bike in those kinds of conditions, but the video is not particularly interesting. So here we are, day 2 in Tuscany, and it's a little bit drier and we're getting a bit more of a boogie on now, which is good. In fact, we're getting a bit of a boogie on so much that I'm not sure if you can hear me, so I've put the screen with its fantastic one-handed thing up to the max, so that you've got a better chance of hearing what I'm on about. So let me tell you about the V2 Multistrada. It's really easy to understand because if you know what a 950S is, it's pretty much the same bike. Significant changes for Ducati, but in terms of ownership, not so significant perhaps. If you're an existing 950S owner, you might want to hang fire on rushing out and buying one of these because it's not that different. But the whole point of the bike is Ducati have made it more accessible for a wider range of riders. So what they've done is lowered the seat height. Well, hey, headline figures, they've dropped it from 840mm to 830mm. So what, say you? I don't really care. Is that really worth a launch in Tuscany? Well, they've made the seat narrower and they've got better standover as well. Makes the bike more accessible to a wider number of riders. You can, if you spec the suspension, the lowered suspension kit, get it down to 790mm, which is actually lower than the Triumph Speed Twin. It's about the same as the Suzuki SV650. And that part of accessibility, that drive to make the bike more accessible for more people, is partly informed by the fact, according to Ducati, in China, in 4 years' time, sales of Ducatis will outstrip those in the UK, and the UK is a pretty important market for them. So then you begin to see why it's so important to lower the bike and give it access to a wider range of riders. So they've made the seat lower, they've made it narrower. You can still get the 850mm seat, which is what I'm riding now, of course. And what else have they done? They've also fitted a few, they've lost some weight from the bike. It's down to 225 kilos. They've lost 5 kilos, 2 kilos from the engine, the rest from the chassis. They've lost some of it by doing things like fitting Multistrada V4 parts, which presumably is cheaper for them as well. So it's got Multistrada V4 mirrors. It's got Multistrada V4 wheels. Collectively, that's 2 kilos less weight, some of it rotating, which makes a bigger difference. The 950S was always the sweetest steering Multistrada for me with its 19-inch front wheel. Until the V4 Multistrada, I suppose, with its 19-inch front. The 17-inch front on the 1260, yes, if you want to go on a track day, you can get stickier rubber for it. But for me, the chassis dynamic of the bike, with its suspension travel and the way it's set up to ride, it works better with a 19-inch. It just has a little bit more agility, a little bit less weight through the steering, but it doesn't compromise the grip on the road in any way. Anyway, always a sweet steering thing. Losing 5 kilos, it might be significant in terms of sort of percentages or for Ducati, but in terms of actually using the bike, it's still a really, really light, sweet steering, agile machine. So we have less weight, we have a lower seat, and we have a 42 horsepower version for A2 license holders, which again is kind of the idea of making the bike accessible. Ducati describe it as your gateway to Ducati's touring universe. Which again makes it kind of, I suppose they're aiming it as like an entry-level Multistrada. Let's just quickly rattle off the prices while we're talking about it. So the base model, and I'll get to those differences in a minute, the base model is £12,450, I think. The S model, which is this fella, comes with semi-active suspension, the TFT up and down quick shifter is 14,450, I believe. And the travel pack version, which I'm riding now, which comes with the panniers and the centre stand and the heated grips, is 15,525. Now, if you want any of those bikes in A2 format, in the UK, it'll cost the same prices. If you want them in Europe, it'll cost you €1,000 less for the A2 version, the restricted version. And the reason for that, say Ducati, you'll never guess, begins in B, ends in exit. Make of that what you will. So anyway, more accessible, and everything else about the bike stays pretty much the same. So it's the same Euro 5 937cc 90-degree V-twin as it was before, still making 113 horsepower at 9,000 RPM. Ducati pulled a bit of a fast one, because I assumed this bike would be the first Euro 5 950 Multistrada. It turns out I was wrong. They actually introduced Euro 5 to the bike last year, and didn't tell me. I don't know if they told anyone. So this is already Euro 5 compatible, which means peak torque is about 2 foot-pound torque down on the original 950 Multistrada, and it makes it at 1,000 RPM lower. But really, again, a bit like the weight, but you're not going to notice, I don't think, that this thing's got 2 foot-pound less. What it does feel different, Ducati have made some differences to the changes to the quick shifter for this bike. They've revamped the sort of the quick shifter strategy, as they call it, and it is a cleaner quick shifting bike. I always have a problem with Ducati quick shifters of old, where I do the double tap. For some reason, I must have a lazy left foot, but I'm forever making a gear shift with the quick shifter and then having an ignition cut, which sort of throws me forward. This bike doesn't do that, so whatever Ducati have done with the quick shifting strategy seems to work. And they've also made some changes to the clutch and some changes to the transmission. I think it also has different con rods as well. I think they're lighter, or they're from a different supplier. Kind of minor changes. And again, those are all aimed at sort of refining the bike a little bit and making it easier to ride. And I would say that if your idea of what a Ducati is and how it feels was formed from a test ride you had 15 years ago on a 1098 or something, and it's a big old clattery recalcitrant V-twin with loads of drivetrain lash and not very flexible and not very accommodating, well, that was Ducati's brand essence back then. You know, they have traditionally built bikes that you have to meet the bike won't come to you. The last 10 years Ducati have worked really hard to put all that behind them and make bikes that anyone can get on and ride and enjoy, and they're pretty much at the apex of that now, because the fueling on this thing, I mean, it was good on the 950, it's so good. The throttle control yesterday in the wet was superb, couldn't be faulted. Anyway, so that's enough about the throttle control. I mean, Ducati say, actually, as a by the by, that this is kind of mirrored in their MotoGP efforts. They say 15 years ago, Casey Stoner was the only guy that could put a Ducati on a podium, pretty much. And this season, they've had 5 different riders on Ducatis on the podium. So their philosophy very much is, let's make the bikes usable for everybody. So it's the same engine, it's the same frame as before, same steering geometry, same brakes, same suspension, semi-active on the S. Same, I mean, these roads are pretty bumpy. You can feel the bumps, but it's great. I mean, we're now sport mode. It doesn't feel harsh, doesn't feel choppy. There's none of that kind of old school Ducati hardness and harshness. Honestly, if your impression of a Ducati was formed by riding a 1098 15 years ago, then please give a new Ducati a go, because it's not the same thing. Yeah, like I said, sure, it's a V-twin, it's got the grumbly vibration, but I mean, look at this. If I stick it in top, what are we doing? 47, actually top's asking a bit much. We're doing 30 miles an hour or something. But there we go. Yeah, of course it's vibrating, it's got shuddering. It is a V-twin. But, you know, is that not flexible enough for you, sir? Look, full throttle, and off we go. These things are different. These things are different. They really, really work for all kinds of riders. I used to be such a fussy rider about Ducatis. I really didn't like them. When I first started riding for magazines back in the 90s, Ducatis, well, they were held on a pedestal. They were put up there. You know, all the cool dudes on the magazines rode Ducatis and loved them. And I remember the first time I rode a 900 Superlight, I was so disappointed. I thought it was going to be some sort of orgasmic experience, and in fact, it was exactly as I just described. The bike was, I don't know, it felt ornery and and reluctant to do the things I wanted it to do. I just thought, this bike doesn't like me. You know, I want to like it, but it doesn't like me. And I've kind of always had that relationship with Ducatis up until sort of the last, I don't know, 10 years or so. Since then, they've just got more and more usable, more user-friendly. And, you know, and if you're a hardcore Ducati fan, if you're into your bevel drive gears and your you know, the kind of the old school Ducati stuff, then maybe that's, you want that bike to be hard to ride and exclusive. But for the rest of us, I'll take a modern Ducati every day. Thank you very much. So anyway, there we go. That's enough of my rabbiting. I want to concentrate on enjoying this thing now. So I'm going to do a bit more riding. Hopefully I've remembered everything, and if I haven't, you can pick me up on it later on when I deliver some kind of verdict on Ducati's 2022 Multistrada V2S.
So there it is, Ducati's 2022 Multistrada V2S Travel. And over these last 2 days we've had a lot of rain yesterday, and we've had dry weather today, and it's been sunny. It's a bit windier. But to be honest, the things that are different about the V2 over the old 950S, you didn't need wet weather or dry weather to tell those things, because the chassis is the same, the engine's the same. There are some tiny changes to things like the clutch and the transmission, but nothing that you'd really notice between the two. So that you could ride it in the dry and the wet, and that stuff stays the same as per the 950. The things that are different about this bike, which is primarily the seat height and maybe the weight, you can include that, doesn't really matter whether it was wet or dry. Now, speaking personally as a 6-footer, the low seat height, the standard seat height at 830mm is getting a bit low, and where it's been narrowed as well, you don't have to spend too long in the saddle to start getting a bit of chafage on that slightly delicate part of the body that we don't want to talk about, which isn't ideal. Now, kudos, plaudits to Ducati for making the bike more accessible to a wider audience. I think when it's easy to be heightist. I think many journalists in this game are heightist because they just simply forget, and it's natural, you understand it, but they don't really appreciate how limiting it can be making bike choices when there's some bikes that are effectively, I don't like to say too tall for people to ride, but it's not comfortable to ride them. And that must be immensely frustrating. And so, like I say, plaudits to Ducati for actually lowering this bike and making it accessible for more people more of the time. But at the same time, for tall geezers and ladies, I think the 850mm seat height is the minimum. And I think if it's possible, you want something a little bit taller than that. But there we go. Having said that, apart from the riding position, I can't really tell the weight. It's 225 kilos. It's 5 kilos less. To be honest, on this thing, losing 5 kilos, it was already a sweet steering, light, nimble, agile Multistrada. In my opinion, it was the sweetest steering and the easiest to manage of all the Multistradas. I mean, great, you got the V4 and the old 1260 V-twins, which were fantastic if you want that kind of ego massage of all that power. And it is fun, it is great. But there is just something a little bit more convenient and a little bit more accessible about the 950, which I also appreciated. And again, with a 19-inch front over the old 17-inch front on the 1260 V-twin Multistrada, I think it's a better steering bike. And that's not changed. All that's the same. Again, it is perhaps a little bit easier to use. Ducati say if you ride them back to back, this new bike, the V2, has got even better throttle control. It's even more civilized. The drivetrain changes they've made make it even smoother. In isolation, it's really hard to tell because the thing is pretty much flawless. I mean, I'm not complaining about it, and I get really fussy about things like throttle control. So apart from that, if you really want to get into the depth of the dynamics and the engine performance and the chassis, you might as well watch the old 950S launch video, somewhere else on Bennett's Bike Social YouTube channel. Because this is the same. it's like I said, I think it's the most usable multistrada. It's the easiest multistrada to throw in the garage and throw out of the garage, get on and ride. The travel pack version with the panniers makes the bike, what, 15.5 grand, and adds £1,000 to the base price, which it does for most sports tourers these days. Suzuki's GSX-S GT and the Ninja SX, chuck £1,000 on it to get the panniers. With this, you also get a centre stand, which you can't with those two, which is a good point, and you get your heated grips with that. And don't forget Tracer 9 GT, which I think is a sports tourer, but nobody else does. You get all that stuff for the 12 grand asking price. But there we go, that's the Multistrada. It's a substantial piece of kit, but they've made it more accessible, really nice to use. Now, I'm sure I've forgotten tons of things to mention, so please pick me up on it, comment below. I'll try and get back and answer the questions. But there it is. That is Ducati's 2022 Multistrada V2S. You can read more about it on www.bikesocial.uk, where you'll have a written review. Thank you very much for watching. Good on you. I'm glad that didn't do that while I was filming, because that would have annoyed me.